Good morning. This morning we're going to talk about contrasting and comparing relationships. It's one of the hardest things to really get a student to do and do well in a piece of writing. But it's a fairly simple concept, and I think once you understand the concept, you really do it very easily. It's just a saying in American slang that you can't compare apples and oranges. The thing being that, the thought being that you can't compare things that are so similar. But the fact is, you can compare apples and oranges. Apples tend to be smooth and oval shaped, and oranges tend to be a little orange and round. I think you have to remember when you're contrasting and comparing is that you always have a dialectic in play between two different kinds of things. You need to ask yourself, what are you comparing? How are they alike and how are they different? You have to put them in relationship to each other with coherence, and then at the end show relevance. What's the point? I want you to look at the handout I gave you, and we're going to look at a metaphor. I'm going to turn to words and look at how you can do the same thing and examine a metaphor. A metaphor, of course, is just a figure of speech that compares two dissimilar things, to put two things together that are not usually put together in order to give you some insight. The language of poetry is the language of metaphor. So here's a metaphor. John has short legs, but he is deer. Monique, what are the two things that are being compared here? Very good. John is being compared to a deer. What is being contrasted? That's not going to be as easy to see. Yannicka, what is it that's being contrasted? Okay, you've got half of it. John's short legs. What about John's short legs? If this were a simile, it would give away the game, so let's see if we can do it with the metaphor. What's being compared? Michael? Of course, absolutely. What's being compared, but not said, are the legs of a deer, right? Which compared to its body tends to be long. So a deer has long legs. So, John has short legs, a deer has long legs. What's the point? If this were a simile, I would say, John has short legs, but he runs like a deer. Okay? So what's being compared, John to a deer? What's being contrasted is John's short legs to a deer's long legs. What's the point? John has short legs, but he can run fast, like a deer can. Okay? That's what metaphorical language does. And that's the point of this comparison and contrast. Okay? So the basic concept still applies. With that concept in mind, you can compare all sorts of more complicated kinds of things. I would not, however, use, this is called a Venn diagram. There's the two circles, and you can have more circles as you have more things to compare with the similar things in the outside circles and the similar things in the inside circles. But when you start to get to more complicated things, Venn diagram gets to be a little trickier to use. So I don't like to use the Venn diagram when I'm talking about extended writing exercises. Instead, I like to use what's called a writing web. And a writing well, which I covered at the beginning of the class, and which I'll briefly cover again, is the tool where you begin with some word, some subject theme or idea, and you just kind of brainstorm from there. What does it make you think about? Okay, what does it make come to mind? It's almost like free association. Okay, as things come to your mind, you just kind of write it down in relationship to themselves and each other, and then you can take that and put them into some kind of order, and then use that order for an outline, okay? So, we're going to use a writing web. To do comparison and contrast. And it works like this. As I explained earlier, when you were writing an essay, basically has three parts. Tell me what you're going to tell me. Tell me what it is you have to say. Tell me what you just told me. Reiterate, summarize, and make your point again. When you're doing comparison and contrast, it's basically the same thing. What is your thesis statement? What are you comparing? You want to put those things in relationship and define those things. And then you want to do your comparison. Okay? And at the end, you want to illustrate the point. What is the point, or what insights do we draw from comparing these two things? And a lot of times that's interpreted. You get to make the point. What point are you trying to make by comparing these two different things? The point may not always be the same, but the process will be the same. So, you're going to open with your thesis statement in which you will put the items that you're examining in relationship, define them, and then you will do the compare and contrast. And there are a couple ways you can do that. One way is so-called divided or whole-to-whole approach, right? And the other way, and again, this is in your handout on page 2, you can use the alternating or part-to-part approach. And those are very simple to understand and explain. In the whole-to-whole approach, say we're comparing A and B. In the whole-to-whole approach, you would take whatever the first item is A, and you would give all the characteristics of A. A has many characteristics. You would talk about all the characteristics of A. And then you would contrast that by talking about then all the characteristics of B. Oftentimes, what you're going to want to do, somewhere in the middle of talking about A and B, you're going to want to use some kind of transition word to let the reader know that you are contrasting between A and B. And also between the different A's and between the different B's, there are words to show that you are showing similarities. If we go back to the example that I gave over here, John has short legs, but he is a deer. What is the transition word here? Rebecca. Yes. But this word that tells you what follows here is different, okay, than what came before it. It's some kind of alternative or makes a statement that contrasts to the previous statement. There are lots of words to do this. Okay, some of those words on your handout, page 2, for comparison, in the same way, similarly, likewise, just as, both, as well. And to contrast, on the other hand, unlike, even though, however, although, okay, and of course, but. So as you do this process, you want to make sure that you use some of these words that signal whether you are continuing to talk about things that are alike or you're going to move now to talk about things that are unlike. Okay? So, in the whole-to-whole approach, you compare A and all the characteristics of A, B, all the characteristics of B. In the part-to-part approach, so this is a little bit more difficult. You take one of the characteristics of A, you take one of the characteristics of B, compare those. And then you do that again for the next characteristic of B you want to look at. The next characteristic of A, and the next of B, the next of A, and the next of B. So you put these things in relationship and then you show coherence by examining the same things that you're looking at, whether you do it this way or this way. Okay? Let's go back to our apples.